In a world brimming with complexity, few creatures embody harmony like the honeybee. With tireless precision, she dances from bloom to bloom, each motion guided by millennia upon millennia of instinct, each act in service to the whole. And then there are the beekeepers, watchful stewards of this ancient symbiosis. Part agri-scientist, part poet, they move along their hives with the efficiency of Moe, Larry, and Curly, tending to the bees' needs as best they can comprehend, and with the infrequency of a waterfall in the Sahara, sometimes running off, flapping and flailing like a penguin on a hot sidewalk. This is their journey.
Welcome to Bee Love Beekeeping, presented by our great friends over at Mann Lake. Today's show features Yappy BeeMan, so of course we'll be talking all about bee removals and mixing it up with some real controversy in the beekeeping world, and his most crazy removal of a colony that's been in the wall of a house for over 75 years. But just quickly before we jump into that, hey, we just received this year's numbers from the U.S. Beekeeping Survey. If you remember, last year we saw record colony losses among commercial beekeepers. The good news is that there's some improvement this year, with reported colony losses of 39.9%. So should we be excited or think the problem is fixed? Here's a quote from Stephen Coy, president of the American Honey Producers Association. He says, "While it's encouraging to see colony loss rates come down from last year's historic highs, losing nearly 40% of managed colonies in a single year is not a victory. It's a crisis in slow motion. Our industry and the crops that depend on it cannot sustain these levels of losses year after year. We need real action now before our industry reaches a point of no return. We must continue to invest in research, support, and solutions that get these numbers down closer to the truly acceptable level of 15 to 20%. So I guess it's good news. Maybe a better term is sobering news. But now let's shift gears and forget about all that serious stuff and have a fun conversation with one of YouTube's biggest beekeeping stars. I'm so happy to welcome our guest today, Yappy the BeeMan. How are you, Yappy?
I'm doing great, and I appreciate you having me on.
Well, thank you for being on. I know how busy you are. You were just telling me you're a firefighter, and you do all kinds of bee removals, and you're super, famous dude on YouTube. How did that ever happen, by the way? How'd you get started with that?
Oh, man, that's a story in itself. You ain't got enough time to hear that entire, what I would call, testimony. As a fireman, we always have a secondary job, something. And I cut, on the side, I cut grass, did landscaping for 14 years. And then my wife wanted to start kind of getting into the herbal medicine stuff, plants, trees, vines, whatever, turn it into medicine. Day came where the class we were talking about the products of a beehive that can be used, for other things other than just honey. And as soon as they started talking about that, I kind of perked up and went, ooh, hey, that's something I can mess with. And learned a little bit about it. And I was already hooked pretty much real quick. One of the members in the class had a bee colony in the back of a barn wall. And they said, man, you can have them bees if you can get them out. Talked to a couple local beekeepers. They said, yeah, we'll help you get them out. And things just kind of rolled from there. Well, the day came to go get the bees. And one guy brought his homemade his homemade bee vac, and bunch of buckets, and man, we were just going at it. Well, I didn't have a bee suit, so I got to just stand back and watch. Well, they went through and they cut and tore up and did everything, and got to a point where they had 2 boxes full of bees, and said, okay, well, we got about it as much as we can get. It looks good. We got all the comb out, and they kind of left, and they were framing comb up in the frames as we were going. Got home and put all that together, and kind of went from there. I fell in love with that aspect of beekeeping because it was my first experience.
Mm-hmm.
And from that point, it just I pursued it. I wanted to learn more about it. And I have made this joke before. They both know it, so I'm not really speaking ill of them. But as I started to learn and research more, I come to find out that, well, they taught me how to do everything wrong in the process. So I started watching some stuff on YouTube. I kind of watched how people did things, and then I adapted to that. And I went and had another friend called me and says, I've got bees between the floor. Insurance is coming out tomorrow. The house got hit by lightning. I'm afraid they're going to cancel our insurance because we got bees. Can you come get them? I'm like, well, yeah. So up on a ladder for 6-7 hours getting bees out of this void space, and it just kind of went from there. And then, it's just been a steady progression ever since. I've had doors that have opened for me that I didn't even know to knock on when it came to this.
How many years ago did you get started?
Right about 15 years ago. And it's kind of funny because I had friended one of the most well-known bee removers in the world at that time. In my opinion, his name was Yappy BeeMan. JP does videos online. He's been doing it for years. And he was one of the primary people that I had watched how he did things, start to finish, open things up, how he handled things. Ended up, I reached out to him and we started communicating, got to be really good friends. And he invited me to come to a little bee gathering thing that they called the Bud Gathering. Back well before our normal social media that we know now, you used to pretty much get on the internet and go to a .com and go into chat rooms. And it was just basically threads. Somebody would ask a question, people would answer. And the original group, one of the original groups that were more well known was the Bee Master group. They had a lot of good contributors that had really deep beekeeping knowledge, and they would mentor people through those chat boards. Well, once a year they would have a get-together over in Mississippi. Anybody that wanted to come could come. That was the invitation. JP invited me to come to one of those. It was, I think, Bud 5 is what the fifth one is when I went to. When I got there, I was just full yappy fashion. Once you got there, it was at Mr. Bud's house, okay? Well, once you got there, Bud was going to give you a nickname, and it took him all of about 5 minutes before he gave me one. He said, I'm going to call you Yap Yap. And I said, Yap Yap? He said, yeah, you won't shut up. And I said, well, I accept it. So we went through the whole weekend and, had a great time. Opportunities opened up from that. But it was a year later. You talk about fast forwarding. A year later, I went to Bud 6. And when I showed up and said hello to everybody, Big Bud walks up and he says, okay, Yap Yap. He said, this year, he said, well, you're gonna take this group of people and you're gonna go do this, and this group of people, and they're gonna go JP and they're gonna go do that. So I went from showing up to learn to the next year I had groups of people that I was teaching. And that was pretty amazing. And then things kind of went from there. JP and I continued our friendship, and one day he said, man, you need to get a YouTube channel. Let's get you up a channel going. And he said, I'll help support it. And I had other people that did. And it kept me going because YouTube's really a hard platform to get into. Anybody can post a video. I mean, you got a cell phone, you can make a video. It's a matter of learning how to make content that keeps people watching. If I go back and I look at some of my earlier stuff, a camera sitting on a tripod, just pretty much one angle of it, that's all I knew how to do. I was imitating those that I saw. We kind of went from there to, progress in our how we made our content. But it was just put the videos out and continue to grow. And it gets real disheartening when, you put your stuff out there and you're getting, 2,000 or 3,000 views. And then all of a sudden one year, I just happened to hit just right. The video that put me on the map was one that I got a phone call for a huge swarm, monster-sized swarm in a cedar tree. And I get there and was like, whoa, this is so cool. Backed my truck up under it, put out a tarp, put out a 10-frame box on it, climbed on top of my truck, and all I had to record it was my cell phone. And I hit record and started recording. It was a little bit wobbly in there. It was my worst video. 7 minutes later, after all this went through, I'm not giving you all the details, so that way people look down in the description and everything, they can go find it. But if they don't see it, just find me, Yappy BeeMan, and the videos. If I hadn't caught it on camera, you wouldn't have believed me. And the reason why I titled that was because I didn't even think about it. There was one particular thing that happens in this swarm that never happens, and that is I had reached up in there and had a handful of bees, and I was like, oh yeah, the bees are great, shook them down, and when I looked back right where my hand had just pulled those bees out, there was the queen. And that quick, reached up, grabbed a hold of her, had her in my hand, and I'm like, now what do? I'm holding the camera, I'm holding the bees, can't put her in a cage. I have the cage right there.
You don't have that many hands.
No. So I told everybody, because I wasn't stopping the recording, I just said, hang on, people. I only got one hand. Well, got the cage, put her in there, and then I put it back up, and I'm holding the camera. And I'm like, this never happens. It happened to me twice in 15 years. The first time it happened was similar, but not completely the same. But the first time that it happened was 5 days earlier than that, where I had a small swarm in a bush, and as I was looking at it, the queen just comes walking right across the top. And I mean, as soon as I saw her, reached down, grabbed her, didn't have a cage on me or nothing, and had to go take her, go back to the truck, get that, put her in there, and it was like, here we go. This was 5 days later and completely different in sizes, but it was just like, it blew my mind. But that's the one that actually just my whole channel was blessed, because that's the one that blew up. It just kind of went from there. So I went from 4 years of YouTubing and 5,000 subscribers to a month later, it started rolling, and it rolled and rolled. And when I was watching it and it hit 1 million views, I was watching the numbers and I thought, man, I'm going to go to bed. When I wake up in the morning, I think this is going to have another million, because of how it was rolling. And I got up the next morning and I'm watching, because, man, it's ticking down, 6 o'clock in the morning. And then all of a sudden, boom, there it hit 1 million. But it was getting 50,000 views an hour. At one point in time, I had over 125,000 views per hour, 5-6 hours in a row. And then it would drop back down a little bit, but then it would boost and boom again. So the video's been seen all over the world. It just, it put me on the map. And from there, it's just been an awesome ride.
That's so cool. Well, let's talk about swarm removals a little bit.
Okay.
You mentioned to me earlier you were out doing a regular job today. You're in Alabama.
Yes, sir.
Tell me what a typical day is like, and maybe today is a good example.
If I'm not at the fire hall, and it's not a Sunday family day, and I generally try not to do on Saturdays either, but I'll schedule Monday through Friday. But a typical day is taking 2 or 3 calls about bees, and then from there it's, driving to one. I could travel 10 minutes away, or I can travel an hour and a half away. But once I get there, it's pretty much, assess the situation, find out where they're at, pick the best route to go to get them that causes the least amount of damage to a home and the easiest to repair for the customer. Educating the customers are probably the most important thing that you can do when it comes to bee removals, because the general public, doesn't understand what we know. We are beekeepers. We understand bees. But to try to explain that to people is that you're in a good place. It's okay. They're not going to hurt your house. They're not out to hurt you. Don't do this, but if anything weird happens, call me. And I spend about 45 minutes on the phone with everybody that calls me, assessing the situation. I've done this enough to where you can send me a picture of the side of your house and I can tell you where your bees are at. I already know. They get into just about everything they can get into, but you just giving the customers home respect, educate them, and do the best job that you can at a fair price, and it will continue to come back to you. We could go off on a whole tangent when it comes to how I feel about some people and doing their bee removals. I mean, not that I'm some kind of an expert at it. I just feel like I do a good job. There are a lot of good bee removers out there. I just happen to be one that's known. In doing that, I feel like I'm getting to a point now where I'm going to start going down a road where I start explaining to people, those different things. The best practices as a remover, but also you got to be real careful in how you share your information. There's been a couple of people that, they want They want to post their progress. And I can't say whether they understand what they're doing. Probably not. But I'll give you an example. There's a guy that has been doing really well this year in his location. I see his social media posts. One of the posts that he showed was the basement of a home, and it was a block foundation. So the whole wall, everything's all cinder block. It had bees in it. In that, he literally went in through there and starts busting concrete blocks. Now, if we, to those that don't understand a concrete block, you have this square piece of concrete, but it's got a hollow here, a center support, a hollow here. And that's what the bees get into. The way they're laid, they can kind of, it's almost like, what's that little game where you put the little red and black little circles down into it, and it falls down through the little thing, and you got to stack them.
Connect 4?
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
Where you're doing 4 in a row vertically, horizontally, or diagonally, something like that.
So, it can kind of end up looking like that in some weird way, you know what I'm saying? We've shown pictures of this job and all these holes that he had cut in that cinder block. And this is what's probably going to get me excommunicated from a bee community. But I'm going to tell you, I'll stand in front of 1,000 people and argue with every one of them. One of my serious mottos is cost versus benefit. Here's the thought process. How much does a normal package of bees cost in your area? If you needed to start a beehive and you ordered a package of bees, how much would it cost?
Yeah, they're going to be around 150 to 180.
Okay.
And a nuke is more like 200.
Okay. Here in Alabama, the state association, some of the clubs, that's their fundraiser. So they sell nukes packages for 130 to 150. Okay. Depending on how far they got to drive to deliver them, there's usually a little bit more gas price added to it. And, with the 5-frame nuke ready to go, 2 to 225, 250, depending on average price. So let me ask you a question. If a 3-pound package of bees on average is $150, how much is it worth if it's in grandma's wall? How much are those bees really worth?
To get out?
No, just once they're out, they're in them. Got a queen, you got some bees. How much are those bees really worth?
I'm not sure where you're going with that. I guess the same amount.
Okay. It's not a trick question. 3-pound package of bees and a queen is $150. So please help me understand why we're going to cost grandma $5,000 to $7,000 to take those bees out of her cinder block foundation. What are we saving? Here's another thought process. When you start busting and cutting all that concrete up, or you got a saw so you can cut brick open, when you start spinning a blade on mortar, it turns to such rough, it granulate powders it. And when that powder gets on bees, they have a difficult time getting it off. And you actually will kill more bees than you save. Does it happen all the time? No. We could argue that. It could be argued that, depending on the size of the colony, some different things. But the question comes down to, how much is the cost versus the benefit on removing bees in something that's going to cost thousands of dollars to repair?
I see where you're going.
So, in my world, it is the most difficult conversation to have. I have that with each individual customer, but there are times where you have to give advice on a customer making a decision that they have to weigh it and then make it for themselves. That's just part of what I have to do with my customers. I actually was having a conversation with a very good friend of mine that's up in Tennessee, and I posed that same question to him just a few days ago. And here's this beautiful, beautiful answer he gave me. When we got to it, he said, I asked him the same thing. I said, where's cost versus benefit if you have to go and cut open a cinder block foundation to get some bees out? And he said, well, we're beekeepers. It's our job to save them all.
Quick break to discuss what just might be on your mind right now. Come on, admit it. You're imagining the upcoming honey harvest. Because no matter where you live in the world, it's either here now or it will be in the near future. And Mann Lake is making it so easy to plan for. Click on over to Mann Lake's website for an amazing selection of extractors, filters, bottling supplies, uncapping knives, supplies for comb honey, everything, and I mean everything you'll need. But if you aren't there quite yet, and the honey flow is right around the corner, make sure you have extra supers on hand. You never can have too many or be too prepared. And right now, Mann Lake is offering podcast listeners $10 off your next order. Just enter code MLBLOVE10 at checkout. That's manlakeltd.com, discount code MLBLOVE10.
I said, okay. I said, well, I can save bees 100 different ways. I said, but where the cost versus benefit, where do you draw the line? I put that out there because I want people to start thinking a little bit more in depth about it.
Well, we live in the real world, and people have to make real decisions like that. When you're a homeowner, sure, $5,000 or whatever that is, grandma may not be able to afford that.
Right.
She may not be able to afford to save the bees even if she wants to.
Right. It don't matter how good of a remover you are. There's something's got to get opened up and something's got to come out. There's beekeepers probably screaming at me right now through the screen or listening to the podcast saying there's always a way to get the bees out. No, there's always a way to reduce the footprint of the bees to some degree if you have to go down a road that nobody wants to really talk about. I don't even want to talk about it, but I'm getting them. I want people to be thinking more than just about how much money they can make, because that's something that I've noticed for the last probably 5 to 7 years. There's a lot of people out there that want to remove bees, and they want to do it for one of two reasons: because they love bees and they want more, which is what got me into it. My first beehive, I fell in love with bees. I still am. I sit out there in my yard, and with a glass of tea on a nice day. Just leave me alone, because I just love to watch bees. Then all of a sudden, it is every year you get the brand new beekeeper comes along and they fall in, oh, I want more bees. Some people pay me to take their bees away from them. I would never tell anybody not to get into it. I just hope that they would educate themselves about building construction and how to find them. If you want to put the investment in, like, a lot of other people have on doing the job right, go for it. But it takes a lot to get into it. And experience and common sense really need to go along with that. Now, you get to the point where you're doing it, but you have to develop that thought process, was where I was going on what's best for the customer and the bees. You got to figure that out. And that's up to the individual beekeeper, and I'm going to leave it at that. But when I was saying that, there's beekeepers that are probably going to be just dog cussing me over this thought process, there's a guy that used to be up in Huntsville, Alabama. His program was that if he wouldn't open up anything in the house. That was his selling point. He's going to put a trap out cone on there. He's going to hang a box there. I'll come back in 2 weeks. We're all good. I met the man one time. I can't tell you what his name is, and bless him, I hope he's still alive. I wouldn't wish anything less. But I can't tell you how many times I've been in behind him in Huntsville because of reinfestations. The common sense when I talk about removal and thought processes. If a queen lays an egg today in a cell, how many days does it take for that egg to hatch into a bee walking around inside that colony? 21 days.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go and put a trap out on the side of anything, and 2 weeks later you're not seeing any bees come out, so now I'm successful. I'm done. Now I can pull my cone and I seal it up and I go on down the road. What have you done? Nothing.
You've killed all those bees that are going to hatch in there.
Yeah. Here's the thing. In 2 weeks, you've gotten all your foragers out, and you've gotten the 2-week-old bees to 3-week-old bees out, because they're the ones that came out to do orientation flights but weren't able to get back in, so they went into your box. All right? But there's still a couple of pounds, give or take, of bees that have not yet aged to the point of doing an orientation flight, that are still walking around in there, taking care of the queen, working honey, taking care of the rest of the bees that are about to hatch out. You still got 3/4 of your colony still in the void.
And the queen.
And the queen.
So I'll say that's a whole colony.
Yeah, still in there. Still got plenty of resources. They still got plenty of pollen. They still got plenty of honey, all right, that they can work with. And all you've done is you've locked them in there. Now, whether or not, and I make no even thought that whether the person who has done this in the past or others who have done this in the past, I've always heard 2 weeks is your window. to do a trap out. And I still beat my head up against the wall on the thought process of that, because it takes 3 weeks just to get what she laid today, the day you put the cone on. 3 weeks from now, they're just hatching. And then there's another 2 weeks before they're going to do orientation flights and come out. That's 5 weeks. So how long do you keep on doing a trap out? How many trips back and forth? Now, let me get you on this one. Most people say they can, debatably can get a queen out. Most of them say, no, you never will. Well, you never will because you never left it in there long enough. Where you can successfully get a queen out of a trap out is when the number of bees in that void weaken and they start getting overrun by hive beetles. Anytime a colony gets weak, they're going to do their last ditch effort to survive, but they're going to abandon where they're at. So they push the queen out in the last ditch effort and then next thing you know, they're coming out there, and then everybody's going, hey, man, that smells like home over there. So they end up going to your box, and there's a real high potential that you can catch your queen, which would be the hope and joy of what we would do. But how long would it take? How long do you need to leave it there? But let's go back to another thought process in regards to doing a trap out. How long does it take? And there's a lot of different ways that they're set up, and there's a hope that the bees in your box will somehow smell the queen and everything that's in the original hive. It's like they don't want to lose that connection. They just realize they're in a different box. Well, if you're not careful, because some people can't just set a beehive entrance right next to the hole in the base of that cone. So they've got their trap cone, they got their box sitting over here. Once this becomes its own entity of the trap out catch box, then that becomes a colony on its own, which with no queen does what? They start creating laying workers. So now what have you saved if you don't do this part right? If you're going to do a trap out, then you need to be over here about every 7 to 10 days, putting a brand new frame of capped brood in that box. And you better make sure that you didn't give them a queen cell. You better make sure, an egg to make a queen with. You see, this is the in-depth. Think about what you're doing before you get into it. How much are you really going to have to put into it? Now, Grandma called you and said, I want these bees out of here. All you're going to do is remove bees. If you do a trap out, you're still leaving the mess and what could happen in behind there, because you just can't open something up. So that's the process. I will do that process, and it's within limitation, but it's also, I'm having to show up at Grandma's house every 10 days to check the bees and to add brood, so that they don't create a new queen, laying workers.
And what if she's an hour drive away? You're running up a big bill at this point.
Exactly. So the person who's doing the job just needs to make whatever decision that they need to. I'm just putting a thought process. I'm kind of starting the snowball going down the hill. Okay? You all just need to pick it up. You just pick it up and make a snowman with it however you feel you need to. All right, and that's where I'm going to leave that.
Well, there's a lot of controversial things that we could talk about on this topic. I have read about and actually heard of people who have seen videos on YouTube, and I'm not naming any specific people, but someone with a female with their hair done perfectly, and they look like they're going to, whatever, they're done up to the nines, and they're opening up the floor of a shed or something and taking all these bees out and saving the bees. And people that don't know what they're doing, unfortunately, see that without some kind of a warning and think they can do the same thing and end up in the emergency room.
So I can't tell you how many times that people have seen me without a bee suit on. I rarely wear a bee suit. And it's because by the time I put the hood on and the black on that, and it makes it very difficult to see anything in there. So I have learned how to treat my bees like ladies. A colony of bees, depending on the time of the year, just work with me on this. is 97% female. In the wintertime, it's probably about 99.9% female. And there's always that one drone that, snuck in there and they liked him, so they let him stay. But you understand the basics of the math. The point is, it don't matter what the percentage is. At the end of all this, if you treat them like ladies, then you're going to be able to get a little farther to the sweet stuff to get them removed. But they ask me, well, what's the deal? Well, you're not wearing a suit. How do you do that? Blah, blah, blah. I don't do it to impress anybody on my end. Back years ago, I told you about my first colony. It came from the back of a barn wall. Okay. Well, I had a suit. I had the smoker. I had it sitting up there next to the house. And I had been watching JP's videos, and JP never hardly wore a suit. Man's sitting there on a bucket, and he's cutting a piece of comb. He's putting it in the frame. Bees are on it. Rubber bands it in, just ever so gentle, takes it, puts it in a box. And I told my wife, I said, hey, baby, come here. I said, I want you to put this suit on. I said, come out here in the bee yard with me. She looked at me like I was on drugs. She said, oh, hell no. No. I said, I need you to be out there with me. She's like, why? I said, because if I die, somebody needs to call 911. My point was that I was going to do what I saw him do. I was putting skin in the game. And when I say skin, I mean literally.
Yeah.
All right. Mr. and Mrs. Beekeeper spend a lot of money on a really beautiful suit, and you should be as protected as you can. But start leaving one of your gloves off. All right. If you're right-handed, make it your left hand and make sure you take a wedding ring off, because you're going to swell if you don't do it right. Okay. And what they did was they would get in there, and I saw a guy do this. He calls me and he says, man, my bees are just horribly aggressive. And I don't know why. The guy came out, he helped us put him here. He wasn't even wearing a bee suit. Now I go in and they're eating me up. What am I doing wrong? I said, put me on a video chat. He puts me on video chat, and I said, do your normal thing. Just have your wife sit there and hold the phone. So she puts me on phone. He takes the lid off. Smoke. Sets the lid down, gets in there and loosens up that first frame. And he said, can you see that? And then he goes right back in.
Smacks it right down.
Then he goes to the next frame and pulls that one and does the same thing. I said, stop. Took 2 frames. That's all I need. Stop. Give him a little puff of smoke, put the lid on it. I'll see you tomorrow. So I get over there and I said, let me ask you a question. I said, if I come, we're standing out in the bee yard. I said, if I look at you right now, I said, I just reach back to Kansas and slap you upside the face, what are you going to do? This is a big old boy. He said, I'm probably going to, do things that I can't speak on the podcast. And I said, exactly. I said, do you treat your wife like you do that beehive? And it kind of took him for a minute. He said, what do you mean? I said, you popped the lid, you pulled this up, you did this, you put it back down in there. I said, and you rolled these bees, you have squashed bees. I said, you pissed them off. So my question is, do you want to treat your bees like your wife? Or do you want to treat your bees like you want to treat me after I slap the dog out of you because you're treating your bees mean? And he kind of looked at me and I said, now, watch what I do. I popped the lid. I took the first frame out, nice and slow. We looked at it. I said, always going to be a feed frame, blah, blah, blah. Then I set it down. 99.9% chance there's not going to be a queen on a honey frame. So I set it down. Then I moved the next one, give it a little room, pull it up, look at it, put it in the spot of the first one, because now I've got a gap. Now I can do the second, all the way to the other end. Found the queen, put it back in there, and I didn't have a suit on, and I didn't get stung one time. And he was like, oh my God, that's the craziest thing in the world. But you got to treat them like ladies. There's so many things that we learn in this hobby. There's so many things that we need to learn that aren't put in the books. People just go out there and they get this, a box and some bees. Man, I got people that'll call me all the time. You see it on social media, and I respect it. I don't mean to speak ill of it, but if you show a picture of a drone and you're wanting to know if it's your queen, you have not taken the time to learn yet the basics of stuff.
And my only point earlier with this topic was sometimes we need to just let people know that may be watching, if you don't have experience, don't try to do this.
I agree. And I know who you're talking about.
Because we get people who have never been in a beehive before, never been close to bees before. They try to do this, They don't know how to be as gentle. They don't know how to read the temperament of the bees ahead of time.
Mm-hmm.
They may have a lot of fear going on, which bees can smell, and they can get themselves in trouble. So that was my only point, but I totally agree with you on so much of this. I think one of the best things I ever did when I was a relatively new beekeeper after a year or so was quit wearing those great big leather gloves
Mm-hmm.
because I couldn't pull out a frame without squishing bees. I couldn't put it back in without it kind of clumping down hard.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have the dexterity, even if you're using some nitrile gloves or something, you have more dexterity and you can just very calmly, right, do this. Calm, slow, deliberate. Those are some of the words right there is what you're talking about, and I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Now, I know who your example is, and watching some of those examples, it kind of gets frustrated. At first, I really got frustrated at it. And I'm sorry, but 15 years ago, I was okay looking. I mean, I've gotten a few years on me and a few more pounds. I'm telling you, I'm wore out. But the point, there is so much that actually can be good in some of the things that we look at and we scratch our head going, this is somebody that's just using a pretty face and a nice voice to sell a video. It doesn't matter what the topic is. I've seen a few of those. There's a few of them out there that when I see them running around in a pair of shorts and a athletic top, I'm thinking just go start an OnlyFans page. I mean, you're that close to it because that's not representing beekeeping. What I would wish for, it ain't ever going to happen. But if you want to educate people, then make it about the bees. Okay, this is what we're here to love and protect and to learn and grow. It's about the bees, not if my hair's up in the nice, and when I'm wearing the right outfit and I can, but you throw a little monetization on a video, well, the more views you get, the more money you make. So to each their own. There's going to be an audience out there for it. I have an audience of people that enjoy my content because I make it fun. I don't get real technical when I give in my videos. I call them my girls. Okay, I call the queen mama, and I keep it simple because I want somebody that when they see my videos, they don't feel like they're getting a classroom lesson from a scientist or a professor that's speaking over their head in something that they didn't teach in school. One of the other things about some of the people who make those videos that appear just way too easy. They are educating people. They are bringing to the forefront that there are people out there that can actually come and save, remove, and rehome your bees. And for that, I absolutely adore some of them. I might scratch my head and be mad because they got more views than I did. But what they're doing is, and no correlation to anything, but Erica from Texas Bee Works, they'll record their whole video and then she goes back, she edits the video and does voiceovers on it. Got a very calm demeanor about herself. She shares a story and people want to watch that. Kudos to Erica for doing that.
And for letting people know that we can save the bees, not just
Yes.
exterminate the bees when we have some kind of an infestation.
Right.
So, yes, absolutely, that's a great message. Hey, I don't want to keep you too much longer. I want to ask you one last thing. I want you to think over the years of one of your most crazy bee removals that you've done. Can you think of one to tell us about? One or two?
All right, so we're going to circle back to where we started and we'll start to work towards our end. I was invited over to Mississippi to the bud gathering. Okay, actually, I think you've had one of your guests was Emily Mueller up from Ohio.
She was great. She was on recently.
Yes, so Emily and I met each other and met her husband and all that at the bud gatherings. What's so beautiful about her is the one thing that with Emily, we were in a yard that had a huge swarm up in the tree. Everybody was ready to go to lunch, man. It was like just time was not on our side. But this one particular swarm I caught and we shook it down to a box. And the question came up about catching a swarm with unmated queens. I said, every swarm you catch is potentially got unmated queens in it. We got to looking at this one. It was the example of that conversation. We'd had that conversation previously, and now we get here and shook them in there, and we start going through, and I caught, what I would call an unmated queen based on her size, her shape, and everything else. Once I caught her and we put her in a cage, I said, there'll be another one in here, but watch the bees, because the bees are going to start running to where she goes. But the thing is she's going to bounce back and forth, and you watch them. Man, I mean, they'll just do it. Everybody's going this way, and all of a sudden, nope, that queen ran up underneath them frames, and she's going over there. And man, it was like watching a NASCAR race, all right, but with about 10,000 bees. And I know we caught 2 for sure, may have been 3, little virgin queens in there. It's just the observation of, but I can't remember if it was our first year together. I think it was. The craziest beehive that we removed, there was an old farmhouse out, in the middle of nowhere. If I remember right, the house was probably about 150 years old, been in the family generation after generation, and they were redoing this entire house. I mean, it was a top to bottom complete redo. They had, in one of the walls, they had a bee colony in it that they had known to be there for over 75 years. Now, this house was made out of 4x4s. It wasn't just 2x4s. They made them out of 4x4s back then. Rough cut lumber 4x4s. I want to say the void between the studs was roughly about 2 feet. It wasn't the 16 inches we do because we go by 2x4s. And it was 12 feet tall. With the help of a lot of people, that was the educational thing that we did that year. But that thing was monster size, and by the time it was all said and done with, the group, we caught the queen. We spent 2 days removing this thing. I have never in my life seen so much bees and comb until we got the one the next year upstairs that they had known to be in that wall for every bit of 45 years. There was a bedroom wall full of bees and comb. Come to find out, when they put the wall up to divide the bedrooms, it wasn't on a stud. So the bees were coming in, and then they were getting past the wall, and actually in part of the next room. And it was probably 6 to 8 feet wide in the studs, and if that thing didn't have 100 gallon of honey in it, it didn't have the first drop, and it had been there 45 years up in that bedroom. Man, have I done some crazy removals? Oh yeah, I've had a lot of fun doing it, but I will always remember those 2 removals in that one house because of how old and insane they were.
Huge. By the way, bless you for what you're doing, because it is hard work. How hot does it get there in Alabama in the summer?
Well,
plenty hot, right?
Yeah, I mean, the humidity is what's going to kill you. Now, granted, half of my removals, 3/4 of my removals are inside of a house, going between the floors or something like that. So, I do really well with that. But like today was not a good day. I mean, just because of the tropical storm coming up, it was raining, had some good wind, and the bees, knowing bees, they don't like weather changes, atmospheric changes, and they let me know it. So it was a rough one today, but so far my eyes ain't too bad.
Oh, there's a little bit of swelling there.
There's still a little bit there, but I generally, by the time I get home, take a hot shower, by the time I go to bed, I look as normally ugly as I do without bee stings.
All right, Yappy, it's been a lot of fun. Thank you very much, and please keep in touch.
Well, I appreciate you having me on, and thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks again for joining us on Bee Love Beekeeping, presented by Mann Lake. Another big thank you goes to Vita Bee Health for their support. Vita's Varroa control range of products includes Apistan, Epigard, and now Varoxan, extended release oxalic acid strips. Hey, thanks a lot, guys. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe to and follow the show, tell your friends about it, and click on over to beelovebeekeeping.com to sign up for our free newsletter. If you have a guest suggestion or topic you'd like discussed on the show, shoot me an email, eric@beelovebeekeeping.com. And remember, if you're not just in it for the honey or the money, you're in it for the love. See you next week.